My own father paid the doctor to say my baby died at birth. He screamed in my face, "I won't raise a poor man's grandchild in this house." For 20 years, I visited an empty grave, mourned a fabricated loss, until the doorbell rang one Sunday afternoon, and who was standing there made my father collapse in terror. "Oh, my dears, I'm so glad you came to visit me today. Come on in, come closer, because this grandma's heart is just full of wanting to talk. Please, make yourselves comfortable. No need to be formal here, because this house may be simple, but there's plenty of love to go around, you hear? My name is Margaret Henderson Sullivan, and I'm 62 years old with a life well lived. Some years harder than others, but all blessed by God. And I live here in Greenville, in the foothills of South Carolina. This little town you might not even know, but it has such a beautiful history, full of old mill houses and good-hearted people. I was born and raised right here, in this land of textile mills and rolling hills, where the air is crisp in the morning and the sunset paints the sky orange over the Blue Ridge Mountains. You know, my dears, I'm not one to complain about life. I learned that every day we wake up breathing is already a victory. But I didn't always think that way. There was a time, oh, there was far too long a time, when I woke up every day wishing I hadn't. 20 years of my life I spent like that, carrying a grief so heavy it almost took me to the grave with it. A grief that, as you'll discover, was a lie. A cruel lie invented by the one who should have protected me. But before I get into that difficult part of the story, let me make a special little request of you, okay? This grandma here gets so happy meeting the people who stop to listen to me. So tell me here in the comments, from which corner of America, or the world, who knows, are you watching me from? And what time of day did you find this video? Are you having an afternoon coffee break? Or is it evening already, after a long day's work? Tell me, will you? I read every comment with care, and I imagine you there on the other side, as if we were sitting together at the kitchen table, chatting. Go ahead and leave that like on the video, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and hit the bell so we can keep meeting up. Let's create this chain of love together, because Grandma's heart has room for everyone. Well, my children, today I'm going to tell you a story I've kept for a long time. A story about what happens when we trust the wrong people. About a father who preferred to destroy his own daughter rather than accept a love he considered unworthy. About doctors who sold their souls for money, and about how the truth, even when it takes 20 years, always finds a way to appear. But for you to understand how I got here, kneading my bread in peace in this simple kitchen, I need to go way back to when I was a girl and thought my father was the most powerful and righteous man in the world. My family, my dears, was what the people of Greenville called old money. My father, Theodore Henderson Sullivan, owned a textile mill that employed nearly 200 people in town. Back then, in the 60s and 70s, having a mill like that was like being king of a small kingdom. Everyone knew Mr. Theodore. Everyone tipped their hat when he passed on the street. Everyone owed him favors. And my father, oh, my father loved that power. He loved seeing fear in people's eyes, loved knowing he could destroy anyone's life with a snap of his fingers. My mother was named Eleanor Grace, a beautiful woman with auburn hair that fell to her waist and honey-colored eyes. But it was a sad beauty, you know, the beauty of a caged bird. Mama had come from a poor family over in Spartanburg, a neighboring town, and my father liked to remind her of that every time she dared to disagree with him. "I lifted you out of poverty, Eleanor," he'd say, "so be quiet and be grateful." And she would. She always would. I was an only child. My father wanted a son to inherit the mill, but after me, Mama couldn't get pregnant again. I think he never forgave me for being born a girl. To him, I was an investment, a chess piece he would use to make alliances with other wealthy families. From childhood, I heard him say, "Margaret will marry well, someone of our standing. This girl will give me grandchildren who will honor the Sullivan name." Our house was a colonial revival mansion in the historic district, one of those with white columns and black shutters. It had 2 floors, 8 bedrooms, and an enormous backyard with magnolia trees, pecan trees, and a vegetable garden that was tended by Bessie, our cook. Poor Bessie had worked for us since she was 15 and never received a thank you from my father. But it was she who gave me affection when Mama was too busy trying not to displease her husband. I remember clearly the routine of that house. In the morning, I'd wake to the smell of fresh coffee brewing and hot biscuits that Bessie made. I'd have breakfast in the breakfast nook, never in the formal dining room, which was only for important guests, and then go to school. I studied at St. Mary's Academy, a Catholic girls' school where all the daughters of wealthy families in the region went. My father insisted I have proper young ladies' education: piano, French, embroidery, etiquette. "A woman doesn't need a diploma," he'd say. "She needs a husband." My afternoons were lonely. My father didn't like me playing with the neighborhood children, common folk, he called them, so I'd stay in the backyard making up games by myself. I'd talk to the chickens, climb trees in secret, and sometimes Bessie would let me help in the kitchen, which was my greatest joy. It was with her that I learned to make cornbread, buttermilk pie, pecan cookies, all those southern recipes that still warm my soul to this day. The only real friend I had was Yvonne, the daughter of my father's driver. We were the same age and played in secret, because if my father found out, it would be a scandal. "My daughter doesn't mix with employees' children," was the law. So we'd meet behind the vegetable garden, away from everyone's eyes, and play house, dolls, make mud pies. Those were the happiest moments of my childhood, those stolen afternoons with Yvonne. But even as a child, I already noticed something was wrong in my family. I noticed the way my father treated my mother. He never hit her, not that I saw, but his words were worse than slaps. He'd humiliate her in front of guests, criticize the food, the clothes, her hair, everything. And Mama would just lower her head and apologize. Sometimes at night, I'd hear her crying softly in her room, and that sound cut through my heart. I also noticed the way my father treated the employees, as if they were less than human, as if they had no family, feelings, dignity. He'd yell, curse, threaten dismissal over any little thing. Once I saw him slap old Samuel, the gardener, across the face because the man had pruned a rose bush the wrong way. Samuel was a gentleman of almost 60 years, white-haired, and took that slap without being able to react. That scene was burned into my memory, my dears, burned with a hot iron. Back then, Greenville was a quiet town, where everyone knew everyone, and the secrets of wealthy families were kept under lock and key. First Baptist Church was the center of everything. Baptisms, weddings, Sunday service, everything happened there. My father always sat in the first pew with the whole family, putting on the show of a godly man. Reverend Patterson dined at our house once a month, and my father donated generously to the church. No one would ever suspect that behind that facade of an exemplary Christian family, there was so much poison. The society of that time, my children, was very different from today. Women had no voice. Daughters obeyed fathers without question. And the poor, oh, the poor were treated as if they were a different species. My father breathed that prejudice, fed on it. To him, the most important thing in the world was the family name, appearances, what others would think. Feelings? Love? That was for weak people. I grew up in that environment, my dears. I grew up afraid of my own father, pitying my mother, dreaming of the day I could be free. I dreamed of marrying a good man, different from my father, a man who would treat me with kindness. Little did I know that fate would play such a cruel trick on me. It would give me exactly the love I dreamed of, only to later tear it from me in the most brutal way you can imagine. It was when I turned 18 that everything began to change. That year, a new young man came to work in our garden. It was March of 1981 when James appeared in my life. I had just turned 18. My father had thrown a huge party, more to show off than to please me, and I was sitting on the back porch reading a book when I heard an unfamiliar voice. "Excuse me, miss, do you know where the gardener's quarters are?" I looked up and saw him for the first time. Tall, lean, tanned from the sun, dark wavy hair and the greenest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. He looked to be in his early 20s. He wore simple clothes, slightly worn, and held a baseball cap in his hand, all awkward. "Mr. Samuel retired," I said, trying not to stutter. "Are you the new gardener?" He smiled, and that smile, my dears, that smile lit up my whole world. "Yes, ma'am. James Cooper, pleased to meet you." James had come from Asheville, a town nearby, to work at our house. He was the son of farmers, poor but honest people, and had learned the gardening trade from an uncle. My father hired him because he charged little and had good references. He had no idea that this humble young man would turn his daughter's world upside down. At first, we barely spoke. I'd stay on the porch with my books. He'd tend the garden, and it was just polite good mornings and good afternoons. But gradually, without realizing it, I began to notice him. The caring way he treated the plants as if they were children. The patience he had teaching Bessie how to grow an herb garden. The respect with which he spoke to everyone, rich or poor alike. And he also began to notice me. I could feel the glances, the hidden smiles, the way he got flustered when I passed by. One day, he left a red rose on the porch. No note, nothing. But I knew it was from him, and my heart, which had never beaten like that for anyone, raced. Our growing close was slow, full of care and fear. We'd meet in secret, behind the vegetable garden, the same place where I played with Yvonne when I was little. We'd talk about everything, dreams, fears, family, the future. James would tell me about his difficult childhood in Asheville, how he lost his mother early and was raised by his father alone. I'd tell him about the gilded cage that was my life, about the father who treated me like merchandise. And with each conversation, each stolen meeting, I fell more in love. The first kiss happened on a night in June during the county fair. The whole town was decorated. There were carnival rides, cotton candy, funnel cakes. My parents had gone to a party at another rich family's house, and I faked a headache to stay home. James waited for me in the backyard, under the big magnolia tree, and when our lips met, I knew I would never be the same again. From there was no turning back. We loved each other with the intensity of those who know they're doing something right and something wrong at the same time. Right because the love was true, pure, beautiful. Wrong because my father would never accept it. Never. The months passed, and our love grew. James talked about asking for my hand in marriage, about taking me away from that house, about building a simple but happy life. "I don't have money, Margaret," he'd say, "but I have 2 hands to work and a heart that's all yours." And I believed him. I believed with all my soul. It was in early 1982, shortly after I turned 19, that I discovered I was expecting a child. I remember the exact day. It was February, it was scorching hot, and I had gotten sick in the morning for the 3rd time in a row. Bessie, who was smart and had seen a lot in her life, looked at me with those knowing eyes and asked quietly, "Child, are you late?" I took the test in secret, at a pharmacy across town where nobody knew me. When I saw the positive result, I cried. I cried with joy, fear, desperation all at once. A child, James's child, the most beautiful and most dangerous thing that could happen. I told James that same night. He turned white as a sheet, then cried, then hugged me so tight he almost broke my ribs. "Let's run away," he said. "Tonight, now, before your father finds out." But I, foolish me, thought I could resolve things another way. I thought if I told my father, if I begged, if I showed him that James was a good man, maybe he'd accept. Maybe. What a mistake, my dears. What a terrible mistake. When I worked up the courage to tell him, my father was in his study, smoking a cigar and checking the Mills books. I walked in trembling, my hands sweating, my heart wanting to jump out of my mouth. And I spoke. I said I was pregnant. I said the father was James. I said we loved each other and wanted to get married. The silence that followed was the most frightening of my life. My father slowly put out his cigar, slowly got up from his chair, and came walking toward me with a calmness that chilled the blood. "Repeat what you just said," he spoke, his voice low, controlled. I repeated it, my voice failing. And then he exploded. He didn't yell. My father never yelled, thought it was vulgar. But the words that came out of his mouth were worse than any scream. He said I was a disgrace, a shame, a bitch in heat who had laid down with white trash. He said I had soiled the family name, that I had destroyed everything he'd built. He said he wouldn't raise a poor man's bastard grandchild under his roof. "You're going to get rid of that child," he decreed. "I have a doctor friend who handles these things. Nobody will know." I said no. For the first time in my life, I said no to my father. I said I was going to have that baby, that I loved James, that we would leave and he'd never have to look at my face again. The slap came fast, precise, and threw me to the floor. My mother, who had heard everything from the doorway, started crying, but did nothing. She never did anything. "You're not going anywhere," my father said, standing over me. "And the gardener is going to learn what happens to those who mess with Theodore Sullivan's daughter." That same night, my father sent 2 men after James. What happened to James that night, my dears, I only found out much later. My father's men found him in the small room out back where he slept, woke him up in a fright, forced him to pack his things, and threw him in a cargo truck heading far, far away. They said if he came back to Greenville, if he tried to find me, if he opened his mouth to tell anyone anything, they'd make him disappear for real. They'd make him vanish in a way nobody would ever find him. And to ensure James never came back, my father spread around town that he had stolen money and jewelry from the house and fled in the middle of the night. He tarnished his name, destroyed his honor, took away any chance he had of coming back with his head held high. Who would believe the word of a poor gardener against Theodore Sullivan, the richest and most respected man in the region? Nobody, my dears. Absolutely nobody. I didn't know any of this. The next morning, when I woke with my face still burning from the slap and my heart in pieces, I went looking for James and found his room completely empty. Not a shirt, not a shoe, not a note, as if he had never existed. Bessie, with tears in her eyes and trembling hands, told me he had left at dawn. "Your father took care of everything, child," she whispered, looking around afraid of being heard. "Don't ask anything else, for the love of God. Don't ask." My world collapsed in that instant. The man I loved, my child's father, had vanished like smoke, and I was pregnant, alone, completely at the mercy of a father who looked at me with disgust. I tried to escape. Oh, how I tried, my dears. The first week, I waited for everyone to fall asleep, tied the bedsheets to make a rope, and jumped from my bedroom window. I hurt my ankle in the fall, but I didn't care. I limped through the dark backyard, my heart beating so hard I was sure they could hear me. I didn't even make it to the gate. My father had hired security guards to watch the house day and night, and they caught me before I reached the street. I was dragged back to my room by my arms, my legs scraping on the ground, while I screamed James's name. My father appeared in the bedroom doorway, in his robe, with that terrible calmness that chilled the blood. He didn't say a word. Just looked down at me, shook his head as if I were a huge disappointment, and locked the door from the outside. I heard the sound of the key turning, and that sound, my dears, that sound was engraved on my soul forever. "You're staying there until you come to your senses," he said through the thick wood, "or until that child is born, whichever comes first." And so began the longest and darkest months of my life. My father kept me practically locked in that room during the entire pregnancy. The door stayed locked from the outside, and only Bessie had permission to enter 3 times a day to bring food and empty the chamber pot. The windows were boarded up from inside with thick planks, leaving just a minimal crack of light through which I tried to peek at the world outside. I lived in the gloom, like a caged animal, feeling my belly grow and my heart die slowly, day after day, week after week. The room reeked of mold, sadness, loneliness. The walls seemed to close in a little more each passing day. I'd walk in circles like a madwoman, talk to myself, cry until I had no more tears, and then cry more. The only window to the world was Bessie, who'd come in quickly, leave the tray, and exit with downcast eyes, without the courage to look at me. I could see she suffered too, that she wanted to help me, but was too afraid of my father. Everyone was. My mother, Eleanor, came to see me only once during all those months. She entered the room with eyes red from crying, her hands wringing an embroidered handkerchief, and stood staring at me for a long time without saying anything. I extended my arms to her, begging for a hug, some affection, anything. And you know what she said, my dears? You know what my own mother said to me in that moment? Why did you do this to us, Margaret? Why couldn't you just obey? Your father only wanted what was best for you. And she left, without hugging me, without consoling me, without even touching my hand. That was the last time I saw my mother look me in the eyes. She died of pneumonia 2 years later, and to this day I wonder if it wasn't from shame, from sadness, from swallowing so many words she never had the courage to say. I forgave her, my dears. I forgave because she was also a victim of my father in her own way. But the pain of that visit never quite healed. The days dragged on, endless. I'd wake up, eat what Bessie brought, almost always without appetite, but forcing it for the baby's sake, stare at the peeling wall, talk to my child in my belly, cry, sleep, and repeat it all the next day. The only thing that kept me alive, the only light in all that darkness, was feeling my baby's little kicks. Each movement was proof that I wasn't alone, that there was someone there who needed me, who depended on me, who loved me without even knowing me yet. I gave the baby names in my thoughts. If it was a boy, I'd call him Lucas, which means bringer of light, because that's exactly what he did. He illuminated all that darkness trying to swallow me. I'd promise him, quietly, with my hand on my belly, that we'd get out of there, that I'd find James somewhere in the world, that we'd be a happy family, that everything would be okay. Sweet lies I told myself to keep from going completely mad. My father would appear in the room from time to time, always with that icy calm that was worse than any shouting. He'd sit in the chair near the door, cross his legs, light a cigar, and look at me with disgust while the smoke rose to the ceiling. Then he'd start talking. He'd talk for hours sometimes, and I was forced to listen in silence. He'd say I was a disgrace, a stain on the family name, living proof of his failure as a father. He'd say that baby would be born marked by sin, that it had no future, that it was better for everyone if it never existed. He'd say no decent man would want me after that I'd die alone and abandoned, that I deserved everything bad that was happening. You can still repent, he'd say, slowly blowing out smoke. You can still fix this. There's still time. I know doctors who do the job clean, without leaving a trace. Nobody needs to know. Every time he suggested that, I'd put both hands on my belly and say no. It was the only word I could still say to him. No, no, no. My voice would come out weak, hoarse from so much crying, but firm. And he'd leave huffing, slamming the door, promising I'd regret it bitterly, that I'd see what he'd do. Reverend Patterson's visits were the worst of all, my dears. My father called him several times to try to convince me to give the baby up for adoption after it was born. The Reverend would sit in the room with his black cassock and thick rosary beads in his hands and talk about sin, shame, how I had offended God and the sacred institution of family. His voice was gentle, almost sweet, but the words were pure poison. He'd say an unwed mother had no ability to raise a child properly, that I would condemn the child to a lifetime of misery, humiliation, and finger-pointing. He'd say the Christian thing, the right thing to do, was to give the baby to a respectable and stable family that could give him everything I never could. He'd say God would forgive me if I did the right thing. "Think of the child, Margaret," he'd say, slowly moving the rosary. "Think of what's best for him, not yourself. True motherly love is the kind that knows when to let go. Do you want your child to grow up being pointed at on the street as the son of an unwed mother, a fallen woman? Do you want him to carry that cross his whole life because of your selfishness?" I'd listen in silence, my hands gripping my belly, my heart bleeding inside. How could a man of God say those things? How could he not see that the only sin in that house was my father's cruelty, the prison he'd created for his own daughter? But I had no strength to argue with a reverend. I'd just wait for him to leave, with his false blessings and poisoned words, so I could cry in peace while hugging my belly. The pregnancy was very difficult, my dears. I almost never saw the sun, barely moved from my spot, ate poorly, slept even worse. The baby grew, but I withered. I had terrible nightmares every night. I dreamed the child was born and vanished from my hands, that I searched the whole house screaming his name and only found locked doors, dark hallways, cruel laughter. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, trembling, with my hands on my belly to make sure he was still there, still alive, still mine. When October came, I was already huge, exhausted, sick in body and soul. I could barely get out of bed. The town doctors couldn't see me. My father was terrified someone would discover the situation and spread the scandal through society. So he called in a doctor from outside, a Dr. Harold Bates, who came from Charlotte specifically to deliver the baby. I didn't know at the time, but this doctor was my father's childhood friend. They had studied together at a boarding school run by priests, owed each other favors for decades, the kind of rotten friendship paid for with silence, complicity, and under-the-table money. Labor began on a Thursday dawn at the end of October. I woke with pains tearing through my belly, alone in the dark room, and screamed for help until I was hoarse. Bessie came running, her face white with fright, and called my father, who called Dr. Bates. They carried me to one of the guest rooms that had been hastily prepared as a kind of improvised delivery room. Everything very fast, very confusing, so much pain, so many people talking at once. I remember lying on that bed with white sheets, the contractions tearing through my body like knives, sweat running down my face, and seeing my father standing in the bedroom doorway, talking quietly with the doctor. I couldn't hear what they were saying because of my own screams, but I clearly saw the doctor nod his head several times. I saw my father take a thick envelope, very thick, from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and hand it to Dr. Bates. I saw the doctor weigh the envelope in his hand, satisfied, and tuck it in his white coat pocket. In that moment, even with all the pain, a voice inside me screamed that something was very wrong. But before I could think straight, Dr. Bates approached me with a syringe in hand. "I'm going to give you something for the pain, Miss Margaret," he said, with a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll sleep for a bit, and when you wake up, it'll all be over. It'll be quick." I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to see my child being born, wanted to hear his first cry filling the room, wanted to hold him in my arms and never let go. I tried to struggle, tried to push the syringe away, tried to scream no, that I wanted to stay awake. But I was too weak, and strong hands held my arms. I felt the needle prick my arm, cold, precise. And in a few seconds, everything around me started spinning, voices became distant, and darkness swallowed me completely. When I finally woke up, the sun was already high outside. I was back in my locked room, weaker than I'd ever been in my life, aching in every part of my body, with my belly empty and flaccid under the sheet. And my baby, my Lucas, was nowhere to be found. When I opened my eyes that morning, my dears, the first thing I did was bring my hands to my belly. It was a mother's instinct, you know? That gesture I repeated all the time, every day, for months. But this time, my hands found emptiness. An enormous, flaccid, painful emptiness. The belly that before was round, firm, full of life, was now just sagging skin and silence. My child was no longer inside me. He had been born. He was somewhere in that house waiting for my embrace. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't obey. I was too weak, dizzy, my head spinning like a carousel. I felt a burning between my legs, a dull ache in my back, and terrible thirst. Even so, I gathered all the strength I had left, leaned my hands on the mattress, and screamed. I screamed with everything I had in my lungs. "My baby! Where's my baby? Bring me my baby!" My voice echoed off the walls of that locked room, and I waited. I waited to hear a baby's cry, waited to see Bessie coming in with that little bundle of cloth in her arms, waited to feel the weight of my Lucas on my chest. But what I heard was the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway. A man's footsteps. The door opened slowly, creaking, and who entered wasn't Bessie with my baby. It was my father, Theodore Sullivan himself, impeccably dressed as always, with that master-of-the-world posture I'd known since childhood, and right behind him, almost hidden in the shadow, Dr. Harold Bates, still in his white coat, with an expression on his face I'll never forget as long as I live. A rehearsed mixture of pity and calculated coldness, like an actor playing a role he'd hurriedly memorized. My father stopped beside the bed, looking down at me with those hard eyes like polished stone. He said nothing, didn't extend his hand, didn't ask how I was, just stood there, still, waiting, as if watching a scene he himself had written. The doctor approached with careful steps, pulled a chair that was in the corner of the room, sat very close to me, and held my hand between his. His hand was cold, my dears, cold as a dead man's hand. And it trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Miss Margaret," he began, his voice gentle, trained, professional. "I need you to be very strong now. I need you to listen to me calmly, okay? Can you do that for me?" My heart raced in my chest. The blood drained from my face. Something inside me already knew what was coming, already felt the weight of those words before they were even spoken. But I refused to believe it. I refused with all my strength. "Where's my baby?" I asked again, my voice trembling so much you could barely understand. "I want to see my baby. Bring him to me. Please, please." Dr. Bates lowered his eyes, looking away from my gaze. He shook his head slowly, from side to side, in a gesture that seemed like slow motion. And then he released the phrase that destroyed my life, that shattered my soul into 1,000 pieces. "I'm so sorry, Miss Margaret. So very sorry. The baby. The baby was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. We tried everything, tried to resuscitate, tried all the procedures, but he didn't make it. The baby was stillborn. Please forgive me." The world stopped spinning. Time froze. The air left my lungs and never came back. I heard every word he said, every syllable entered my ears, but my brain refused to process it. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be true. It had to be a nightmare. I was going to wake up. I had to wake up. "No," I whispered, shaking my head slowly, then faster, faster. "No, no, 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 you're lying. My baby's alive. I know he is. I felt him kicking yesterday. He was strong. He was healthy. You're lying to me. Bring him here. Bring me my baby now." I tried to get up from the bed in a desperate impulse, but my father took a step forward and pushed me back onto the mattress with just one hand on my shoulder. He didn't even need to use force. I was so weak any child could have knocked me down. I fell backwards, the air leaving my lungs, tears finally exploding from my eyes. "Stop this nonsense, Margaret," my father said, his voice cold and controlled as always. "What happened, happened. There's no going back. There's no point screaming like a lunatic." I looked at my father through tears, his face all blurry, and I begged. I begged with my eyes, with outstretched hands, with every piece of my being. I begged for an explanation, for consolation, for a hug that never came in 19 years of life, for any crumb of humanity. And you know what he did, my dears? You know what my own father did in that moment when his daughter had just lost a child. He shrugged. He simply shrugged, as if I'd told him I'd broken a glass in the kitchen, and said, with the most natural tone in the world, "It's better this way, Margaret. God knows what he's doing. Things happen for a reason. I already warned you that child wasn't going to work out, that it would be a problem. I wasn't going to raise a poor man's bastard grandchild under my roof anyway. At least now you can move on. You can have a decent life, like I always wanted for you. This matter is closed." Those words, my dears, those words entered me like ice knives. My own father, relieved by his grandchild's death. My own father, thanking God that I'd lost my baby. My own blood, celebrating the tragedy that had destroyed me. In that moment, in that exact second, something inside me died along with the news. The obedient daughter, the girl who still held hope of being loved, the woman who believed in family. All of that died right there in that room. What was left was just pain. A pain so big it didn't fit in my body. "I want to see him," I said, my voice coming out hoarse, strange, almost unrecognizable. Someone else's voice. "I want to see my baby. I want to say goodbye. Let me at least say goodbye to him." The doctor and my father exchanged a quick look. Too quick, too nervous, but I was so destroyed, I barely noticed. "That's not a good idea, Miss Margaret," Dr. Bates said, squeezing my hand hard, almost hurting me. "The baby, the little body, isn't in good condition to be seen. It's better for you to keep the memory of him in your belly, alive, kicking. You don't need to see him like that. It'll be worse. Trust me." "But the funeral," I insisted, tears flowing non-stop, soaking the pillow, soaking everything. "I want to go to the funeral. I need to be there. I'm his mother. Please." "We already took care of everything," my father interrupted, dry as stone. "Reverend Patterson did a private blessing early this morning, while you slept. The body's already been buried in the municipal cemetery, in an unmarked grave. There was no reason to make a fuss. The fewer people who know about this whole disgrace, the better for everyone, especially for you. Unmarked. My child was buried without a name, without his mother by his side, without a flower, without a goodbye. As if he were trash that needed to be quickly discarded, hidden under the rug, forgotten forever. As if he had never existed. I screamed. I screamed until my throat tore. I screamed until my voice disappeared and only a hoarse wheeze came out. I tried to scratch my father with my nails, tried to hit the doctor, tried to get out of bed and run to the cemetery anyway. But they held me by the arms, by the shoulders, tied me in the sheets like I was a criminal, and Dr. Bates took another syringe from his coat pocket. I felt the cold prick in my arm, and darkness swallowed me again. The days that followed were a gray blur of pain and sedatives. I'd wake up, open my eyes to the ceiling, remember my child was dead, and scream. I'd scream until someone appeared. Then came the injection, and I'd sleep again. I'd wake, remember? Scream, blackout. An endless cycle of agony I couldn't break. When they finally stopped sedating me, I don't know if it was days or weeks later, I had become another person, an empty shell walking through the house. I didn't eat properly, didn't talk, didn't cry anymore. The tears had all dried up. I'd sit on the bed or in the room's armchair, staring at nothing, hours and hours on end, without blinking, without moving. Bessie tried to cheer me up, brought me broth, spoke to me kindly, stroked my hair. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. It was as if I had left, and only my body had stayed. One night, I don't know how long after the birth, I waited for everyone in the house to fall asleep and left my room in silence. My father had stopped locking the door, thinking I no longer had the strength or will to escape. And he was right. I didn't want to escape. I wanted to find my child. I went to the municipal cemetery in Greenville barefoot, in my white nightgown, in the middle of the cold November dawn. The full moon illuminated the old headstones, the rotting wooden crosses, the forgotten graves covered in weeds. I searched for my child's grave. I searched for hours, walking among the dead, calling quietly, "Lucas, Lucas, where are you, my son? Mommy's here." I found nothing. No recent grave, no disturbed earth, no nameless cross. Nothing. It was as if my child had never existed, had never been born, had never been buried there. I returned home before dawn, shivering from cold and confusion. In the following days, I tried to ask Reverend Patterson where exactly my child had been buried. He turned pale, stuttered, wiped sweat from his forehead, said he didn't remember exactly, that my father had taken care of all the paperwork and details. I tried to ask Bessie, but she'd look away, change the subject, start trembling and hurry out of the room. Something didn't add up, my dears. Something in that whole story was very wrong. But I was too destroyed to think straight, too destroyed to investigate, to ask questions, to insist. I ended up convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks, that grief was slowly driving me mad, that I had searched in the wrong part of the cemetery. It was easier to believe that than face the possibility of an even more terrible truth. The months passed, turning into years, and I withered inside that house. I didn't go out anymore, didn't receive visits, did nothing but exist. My father left me alone. He'd gotten what he wanted after all. The problem had been solved. The disgrace had been buried, and I was just a ghost in a nightgown wandering the dark hallways of the Sullivan mansion, waiting for death to come reunite me with my child in heaven. James never came back to Greenville. Years later, many years later, I heard from an acquaintance that he was living in rural Georgia, working as a ranch hand on a cattle farm, living a sad and lonely life. He also thought the child had died at birth. He also carried that grief on his back. He had also been destroyed by my father's lie. Theodore Sullivan's evil reached both of us, even separated by hundreds and hundreds of miles. 20 years, my dears. For 20 whole years I visited that cemetery looking for a grave that didn't exist. I'd pray on my knees in the dirt, ask forgiveness for not protecting my child, beg God to take care of him in heaven. For 20 years I carried a guilt that wasn't mine, a pain that had no remedy, a grief that had no end. 20 years of my life wasted in the darkness of a monstrous lie. But the truth, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, always finds a way to appear. It may take time, it may hide, it may seem impossible, but it appears. And in my case, it appeared on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, 20 years later, when the doorbell of that house rang and turned my world upside down forever. It was a Sunday in October, my dears. October 2002. 20 years exactly had passed since that dawn in the improvised hospital, since that syringe that stole from me the moment of seeing my child born, since that lie that destroyed my life. 20 years I'd lived like the walking dead, wandering the rooms of that house that had become my prison and my tomb at the same time. Much had changed in those 2 decades. My mother, Eleanor, had passed in '84, taken by pneumonia that doctors said she didn't have the strength to fight. I always thought she died of sadness, really, from swallowing so many words, from pretending everything was fine. Reverend Patterson had also passed on, and I confess I didn't shed a tear for him. Bessie was still at the house, older, more hunched over, but still with those kind eyes that were my only comfort for years. And my father? Oh, my father had aged in a way that was a pleasure to see. And forgive this grandma for the spite, but it's the truth. Theodore Sullivan, the all-powerful mill owner, the man nobody dared contradict, had turned into a bitter, bankrupt old man. The mill had gone under in the early '90s, swallowed by competition and my father's own administrative errors. The bad investments accumulated, debts grew, and little by little everything he'd built crumbled like a sandcastle in the tide. That Sunday in October, the Sullivan mansion was falling apart. Paint peeling, roof leaking, furniture sold one by one to pay the bills. Only the house itself was left, and it was about to go to auction on Monday. The bank had bought up all my father's debts and given an ultimatum: either pay everything by the weekend or lose the property. My father wandered the house like a lost soul, grumbling, cursing, blaming everyone but himself. I watched from afar, sitting in the old living room armchair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Seeing him fall didn't give me joy. I hadn't felt joy in a long time, but it didn't give me pity either. That man had destroyed everything I loved. Let him reap what he sowed. Lunch that Sunday was silent and sad. Me, my father, and Bessie sitting at the table too big for the three of us, eating chicken stew that barely had any taste. My father wouldn't stop complaining. "Tomorrow they're taking this house," he grumbled, chewing angrily. 75 years old, and I'm going to die on the street like a homeless person. Is this what I deserve after everything I did for this town? I didn't respond. I had nothing to say. I just wanted that lunch to end so I could go back to my corner and continue my ghost existence in peace. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the empty house, and the three of us looked at each other. We weren't expecting any visitors. Nobody visited the Sullivans anymore. The rich friends had disappeared along with the money, and those who remained were ashamed to be seen there. "Must be the bailiff," my father growled, throwing his napkin on the table. "Come to humiliate me ahead of time. Let me kick that vulture out." He got up from the chair with difficulty. His knees weren't what they used to be, and dragged his slippers down the hallway to the front door. I stayed at the table, without the energy to get up, poking at the food on my plate. I heard the door open. I heard a moment of silence, and then, my dears, I heard a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A scream, but it wasn't a scream of anger as I expected. It was a scream of pure terror. A high-pitched, strangled scream from someone seeing a ghost from the past. From someone seeing something impossible right in front of them. "No! Impossible! You're dead! You have to be dead!" My heart raced. I dropped my fork, which fell on the plate with a metallic sound, and jumped up from the chair. I ran down the hallway as fast as my legs would allow, blood pounding in my ears, not understanding anything that was happening. When I got to the entrance hall, I found my father collapsed on the floor. He was sitting on the cold marble, his back against the wall, white as a sheet, trembling from head to toe. One hand was pointing at the open door, and his eyes were wide in a way I'd never seen. They looked like they were going to pop out of their sockets. I followed his gaze to the door. And what I saw there, my dears, what I saw standing in the doorway that Sunday in October, changed my life forever. It was a young man, actually. He must have been about 20. Tall, strong, well-dressed in an impeccable dark suit that seemed to cost more than everything left in that house. He was holding a leather briefcase in his left hand, and his face, oh, his face. It was like looking at the past. It was like seeing James again, young, handsome, full of life. The same bright green eyes, the green of banana leaves after the rain, the same strong, determined chin, the same wavy black hair, only shorter, neater. And on his neck, clearly visible above the collar of his white shirt, there was a mark. A birthmark shaped like a crescent moon that I had seen on the ultrasound so many years ago. The young man didn't look at my father collapsed on the floor, didn't pay him any mind. Those green eyes were fixed on me, and they were full of tears streaming shamelessly down his cheeks. When he spoke, his voice came out choked, trembling, but firm. "Hi, Mom. It took me 20 years, but I found you, and I discovered that my grave at the cemetery has been empty all this time." My knees gave out. I collapsed right there in the hallway, my legs without any strength, and a sound came from my throat that I can't even describe. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't crying, it was something primitive, animal, from the depths of the soul. It was the sound of a mother recognizing the child she thought she'd lost forever. "Lucas," I whispered, tears pouring. "Lucas, my son, my boy." He crossed the doorway in 2 long strides, knelt in front of me and hugged me. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, but I never wanted him to let go. I smelled his scent, felt the warmth of his body, felt his heart beating against my chest. It was real. He was real. My son was alive. We stayed there embracing for a time I can't measure. It could have been a minute or an hour, it didn't matter. The whole world had disappeared, and there was only me and him, mother and son, finally together after 20 years of lies. It was my father's moan that brought us back to reality. He was still collapsed on the floor, hand on his chest, breathing labored. Who are you?" he managed to stutter, his voice failing. How are you alive?" Lucas stood up slowly, helped me up too, and turned to my father. His look changed completely. The affection I'd seen seconds before disappeared, replaced by something hard, cold, sharp as a blade. It was the look of someone who'd come to collect a very old debt. "I'm the baby you had thrown away," Lucas said, his voice firm and controlled. "The poor man's grandchild you didn't want to raise, the bastard you paid a doctor to say was stillborn. I'm Lucas Cooper Sullivan, and I spent 20 years in an orphanage in another state because you thought I wasn't worthy of living in this house." My father turned even whiter, if that was possible. "The orphanage? How did you find out?" "Doctor. Harold Bates died last year," Lucas continued, taking a paper from the leather briefcase. "On his deathbed, remorse hit him, and he left a written confession for his family. His daughter sought me out, showed me the letter where he told everything, how you paid him to pretend the baby died, how he handed a healthy child over to an orphanage in Colombia, how you made up a fake burial. She asked my forgiveness for her father, and gave me this." He threw the sheet of paper on the floor, at my father's feet. It was a copy of the doctor's confession, proof of everything. "I went to that orphanage," Lucas continued. "Got my records, got the original birth certificate you tried to destroy, got the documents from the illegal adoption that was never completed because nobody wanted me. And with all that, I studied. I studied hard, got my law degree, passed the bar, and specialized in banking law." He took a step toward my father, who tried to crawl backwards without success. "Do you know which bank bought all your debts? Do you know who's the lawyer representing that bank?" My father's face contorted when the penny dropped. "It's me," Lucas said, with an icy smile. "I convinced the bank to buy the Sullivan debt. I prepared all the auction paperwork, and I just bought this house for a fraction of its value using every penny I saved working since I was 15. He took another document from the briefcase and threw it on top of my father. "This property is now mine. You have 24 hours to get your things and leave. But my mother—" He looked at me with all the love in the world. "My mother stays. This house is hers now. It always should have been hers." My father clutched his chest harder, breathing increasingly difficult. Bessie, who had watched everything from the kitchen doorway, ran to call an ambulance. Theodore Sullivan had a heart attack right there, on the floor of the living room he once thought would be his forever. He survived, if you can call it surviving. He ended up in a wheelchair, half his body paralyzed, and went to live in a public nursing home on the outskirts of town because there was nobody left who wanted to care for him. The rich friends disappeared, the employees left, and the Sullivan name became synonymous with shame in Greenville. And me? I finally started to live, my dears. At 39 years old, embraced by the son I thought I'd lost, I finally started to truly live. And here I am, my dears, 23 years after that Sunday that changed everything. 62 years old, still living here in Greenville, in this same house that was once a prison and today is my true home. The walls are the same, the address is the same, but the energy running through these rooms is completely different. Where there was once fear, today there's children's laughter. Where there was once deadly silence, today there's the smell of cake in the oven and music playing on the kitchen radio. Lucas renovated the entire house after he bought it back. Or rather, after he bought it back for me. Changed the leaking roof, painted the walls cheerful colors, fixed the wooden floors that creaked everywhere. But he made a point of keeping some things the original way. The blue windows on the facade, the iron railing on the porch, the copper pots in the kitchen that were my grandmother's. "This house has history, Mom," he said. "We don't erase the past, we transform it." My son, oh my son. How proud I am of that man, my dears. Lucas today is 43 years old, a respected lawyer here in the region, married to a wonderful woman named Rachel that he met in college. Rachel is a history teacher at the county high school, a sweet and firm woman at the same time, who treats me like I'm her mother too. They live in a house nearby, 10 minutes walk, and almost every day they come to visit me. And the grandchildren, my dears? Oh, the grandchildren are the cherry on top of this new life God gave me. I have two. Benjamin, 12 years old, who's the spitting image of his father and grandfather, those same green eyes that won me over back then. And Melissa, 8, who takes after her mother and has a strong personality that makes me laugh every day. Both of them are here at the house on weekends, helping me in the kitchen, making a mess in the living room, filling these rooms with life. It was because of them that I started my little baking business, you know? It all started when Benjamin was about 5 and asked me to teach him how to make bread. We spent the whole afternoon kneading the dough, waiting for it to rise, putting it in the oven. When the bread was ready, golden and fragrant, he took a bite and said, "Grandma, this bread is so good, you should sell it." I laughed at the time, finding it funny. But the seed was planted. Today, 23 years after getting my life back, I make breads, cookies, cakes, and biscuits by order for the whole neighborhood. Nothing too big. This grandma doesn't have the stamina for a factory anymore, but enough to keep me busy and always have people stopping by the house. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, the neighbor ladies come to pick up their orders, have a coffee with me, catch up on conversation. Bessie, who's now 84 years old and lives in a small room out back that Lucas specially renovated for her, still helps me separate orders and attend to customers. We make quite a pair, me and her, two stubborn old ladies who refuse to stop. You must be wondering about James, aren't you? Lucas's father, the man I loved so intensely when I was young. Well, my dears, this part of the story also had a beautiful ending. When Lucas discovered the whole truth about the past, one of the first things he did was look for his father. He found James on a farm in rural Georgia, already with graying hair, living alone, still carrying the grief for the child he thought he'd lost. The reunion of the two was like a movie, my dears. Lucas told me that when he arrived at the farm and introduced himself, James fainted. Really fainted, fell to the ground like a board. When he woke up and understood his son was alive, he cried for 3 straight days without stopping. The two spent a whole week together, talking, getting to know each other, making up for lost time. James came to see me too, a few months later. I was in the kitchen making bread, always making bread, when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door and came face to face with those green eyes I'd never forgotten, now framed by wrinkles and white hair. We stood for a long time just looking at each other, unable to say anything. Then he opened a smile, that same smile that won me over back then, and said, "Hi, Margaret. I took a while, but I came back. I won't lie to you. We tried to rekindle the romance. We dated for a few years, even lived together for a time. But we were different people from those young lovers from 40 years ago. The love still existed, but it had transformed into something else, a deep affection, a true friendship, immense respect. Today, James lives in Asheville, his hometown, but comes to visit me every month and spends Christmas and Easter here with us. We're a family, my dears, a strange family patched together, full of scars, but a real family. And my father? Theodore Sullivan lived another 8 years after that heart attack, trapped in a wheelchair in a public nursing home on the outskirts of Greenville. I went to visit him only once, more for my own closure than any obligation. He was unrecognizable, thin, hunched, with the empty look of someone who'd lost everything. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't apologize for anything, just kept looking at me with those eyes that were once so hard and now were just sad. I said what I had to say, turned my back, and left. Never went back. When he died in 2010, I didn't go to the funeral. Sometimes, when I'm alone needing my bread at dawn, I think about everything I went through. I think about the girl I was, the woman I became, the pains I carried, and the joys I finally found. And I give thanks, my dears. I thank God, fate, life, for giving me a second chance. If you made it this far with me, holding this grandma's hand through such a painful story, I need to leave some words in your hearts before I say goodbye. I spent 20 years of my life crying for a child who was alive, 20 years visiting an empty grave, asking forgiveness for a death that never happened, carrying a guilt that was never mine. And you know what I learned from all this? I learned that lies, no matter how well constructed, no matter how powerful the person telling them, have short legs. The truth may take time. In my case, it took 2 decades, but it always finds a crack to get through. If you're listening to me now and feel something's wrong in your story, some piece that doesn't fit, some family secret nobody wants to tell, don't give up looking for answers. I almost gave up, my dears. I almost accepted that lie as absolute truth and went to my grave without knowing my son was alive. If Dr. Bates hadn't felt the weight of conscience at the end of his life, I would have died without ever hugging my Lucas. So I tell you, question, investigate. Don't accept strange silences and averted gazes as answers. I also learned that blood isn't always family, and family isn't always blood. My father was my blood, but he was my greatest tormentor. Bessie was the household employee, but she was the one who gave me affection when my own mother couldn't. True love doesn't come with a last name or inheritance. It comes with presence, care, respect. I chose not to forgive my father, and I'm not ashamed to say it. Some people think forgiveness is mandatory, that we need to forgive to move forward. But I moved forward in my own way, recognizing the evil he did, not pretending everything was okay. Forgiveness is a choice, my dears, not a debt. And each person knows the weight they can carry. For those going through manipulation within their own family, for those who feel something's being hidden from you, for those carrying grief that seems too strange, I send my tight hug. Seek help from authorities in your country, from organizations that protect people's rights, from professionals who can guide you. Don't stay alone in the dark like I did. The world is big, and everywhere there are good people willing to help. Life taught me we can be reborn as many times as necessary. I was reborn at 39 when I thought it was too late. It's never too late, my dears. Never. Now, before I go, this grandma wants to make a special request of you who stayed with me until the very end. If this story touched your heart, if you know someone who needs to hear that the truth always appears, share this video. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories from this grandma here, and leave me a comment writing the word reborn. Only those who stayed until the end will know why. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Let's spread this chain of strength and hope together. God bless each one of you. This grandma here loves you with all her heart. Until the next story, my dears, take care of yourselves.